Welcome to Key 2, the 10 Steps to Screening. This key will introduce the Screening Handbook from Volunteer Canada. We will discuss the 10 steps to screening and go on to break down each step. We will then discuss how to use the 10 steps depending on the size of your organization and the number of volunteer positions that you have. And finally, we will discuss some of the nonprofit sector statistics found on screening practices. The 10 steps to screening are scalable. They are simple, but they are also rich and in-depth. This means that they can be applied regardless of the size of the organization or the number of positions that need to be filled. The 10 steps to screening isn't just for complicated, high-risk volunteer opportunities. They are effective and make a difference for all volunteer programs. The 10 steps can be found in the Screening Handbook, which was created by Volunteer Canada on behalf of Public Safety Canada. See the download icon? If you access our sidebar after the video, you can download a copy of the handbook. This thorough guide was created to help organizations like your own create, revise, and use screening practices when recruiting volunteers. The screening process can be broken into 3 sections. When put back together, we have the 10 steps to screening. While we discuss each section, we will cover what steps are involved and who from your organization should be involved. First, the pre-hiring phase. Here, there are 3 steps that need to happen before you start looking for volunteers. This section may involve your board members, senior leaders, and possibly volunteer managers. Start by determining the policies and risks for your organization. This is similar to some of the ideas in Key 1, but this key goes into further detail. Some of the things you need to consider are: will the volunteer be working in a position of trust and authority? Are they working directly with clients? Are they working in an office position? Will they have access to vulnerable people? Will they require a police information check or a vulnerable sector check? Discuss and understand the risks of your organization and participants so you can set policies to ensure the safety of your organization, your staff, your clients, and your volunteers. Next, write clear and specific role descriptions for each volunteer position. The download icon that you see indicates that we have a template for position descriptions available in the sidebar. Take a look. Some things you could think about when creating a role description are: have an idea of the position. What are the tasks associated with the position? What are the volunteer requirements for completing the role? This may include specific skill sets or any physical requirements. What attributes are you looking for? What will a typical shift or day look like for the volunteer? Approach this as you would any other HR position. Why? Because a volunteer is an employee of your organization. We will talk more about position descriptions in key number 3. Third, you will establish a formal recruitment process. Commit your organization to a process that includes applications, interviews, reference checks, and follow-ups. These steps are all scalable and can be simple or more in-depth depending on the size and capacity of your organization. Decide who in your organization will be responsible for the recruitment process. Is it a senior staff member, your board members, a volunteer manager, or will everyone be involved in different ways? This would be a great time to consider compiling a list of interview questions. In step 3, we discussed establishing a formal recruitment process, and this is the stage where you will implement the process. By now, you should know who is involved in the hiring process. Refer back to step 3 if you need a refresher. Make sure these people are well equipped to handle the hiring of your volunteers. Use an application form. Please note, an application form is not necessary for all organizations. If you have a small volunteer base, you may know your volunteers on a personal level. This also doesn't have to be an extensive form. It can be informal or small. Include name, contact information, why they want to volunteer, and what role they are interested in. However, there are some organizations who have larger volunteer-based programs. If you are in this realm, you may require more thorough application forms as part of your screening process. Application forms have another benefit other than information. They also allow your organization to keep track of your volunteers and potential volunteers. Some questions you may want to include on your application form are included in our window of work tool that you can download in our sidebar after the video. Conduct an interview. Get to know your volunteers. This is a great time to have a chat with the volunteer to get to know them on a personal level. Discover their passions, interests, their motivations for volunteering. You can ask questions to find out skill sets. Are they an appropriate fit for the role? Are there pieces of the job that are not suitable to this potential volunteer? This part can be very informal as well, depending on your organization. Some organizations will have a short conversation to confirm the volunteer's interest and availability, while others hold formal interviews. That's up to you. Follow up with volunteer references. Remember, you will have to gain permission to contact any of their references. Know ahead of time what information you want to find out from the references. For example, is time management a concern? Or maybe you want to know how well the volunteer gets along with animals. Depending on your organization or the role, a reference check can be an informal or quick conversation with the person who referred the volunteer, such as the parents, a teacher, or maybe even other volunteers. When necessary, request a police information check. Based on your policies and role descriptions, you should have a good understanding of what type of police check you may require. To refresh, refer back to Key 1. But remember, the police information check or vulnerable sector check is not always necessary. Usually, the more access a volunteer has to vulnerable people, the higher the degree of screening that is necessary. See the download icon? If you access our sidebar after the video, you can view both our screening worksheet template and our Is a Police Information Check the Only Way document. These will help you decide whether or not a PIC is necessary for you. If you require a police information check or a vulnerable sector check for a volunteer, you must obtain their consent to access these checks. Also, you must meet the following privacy rule. The collection and use of the potential information must be for the purposes that a reasonable person would consider appropriate and reasonably necessary. And finally, the collection, use, and disclosure of this information must be directly related to the volunteer opportunities and circumstances. Volunteer managers, supervisors, or any staff member in charge of the volunteers should be responsible for the final stage of the 10 steps to screening. This is the stage where your organization will ensure that your volunteer is the right fit for the role. Start by conducting an orientation or training session for your volunteer. The orientation might include an introduction to the role, information on privacy and practices and policies, a walkthrough about workplace safety, an introduction to the organization, or perhaps a tour of the facilities. These sessions will help volunteers understand their roles while increasing their capacity to meet your policies. This will help build pride and encourage repeat engagement. Supervise and evaluate. Depending on the nature of the volunteer position, supervision and evaluation will happen at varying degrees. It will be important to be factual and constructive with the volunteer. Build relationships with your volunteers and make sure to support and encourage development. This will help you build trust and keep your volunteers engaged. This should be a mutually beneficial experience where you are learning from one another. If improvements need to be made, remember to be constructive in your criticism. This is a learning process for everyone involved. Now we move to follow-up and feedback. Listen to your participants about the service they are being provided. Listen to your volunteers because they may have some great feedback for your organization. Listening also helps you with recruitment in the future. And finally, we know it sounds repetitive, but give the volunteers constructive feedback. How they are doing, what could be done better, etc. This is beneficial for everyone. And that's the 10 steps. Try thinking about how you can adapt these steps to fit your organization and the volunteer roles you need filled. Remember, we have the 10 steps to screening available for download in the sidebar. Print off a copy for future quick reference. You don't have to be a large organization or have high-risk volunteer roles to follow the 10 steps to screening. The 10 steps can be as comprehensive as you need them and adapted for smaller organizations. We at Volunteer Alberta have spent a couple years looking at volunteer recruitment practices through surveys, focus groups, meetings, and conversations. And we have found that 64% of our respondents say they have not heard of or are not using the 10 steps to screening. Even so, we decided to do a bit more digging. Once we separated the steps and asked questions about each step, we found most organizations are applying some, if not all, of the steps in their own volunteer recruitment processes. So congratulations! Even if you don't recognize it yourself, we know that you and your organization are doing a great job and will have an effective screening process for all your volunteer roles. Here are some of the more interesting stats we came across in our research, aka some food for thought. More than 70% of organizations are conducting some sort of training and evaluation within their current screening process. These organizations also include a police information check or vulnerable sector check when applicable. However, less than half of participating organizations are following up with their clients on the services provided by the volunteers. This is a huge opportunity you could take advantage of. And that wraps up key number 2. Thank you for watching. In the next key, we will discuss how to create great volunteer positions within your organization, so make sure you watch the next video.